Hello and welcome to this 2024 United States presidential election prediction between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Last time I did one was in, I think it was in July, and obviously a few things have changed since then. Since then, Donald Trump has had 2 assassination attempts on him, and the Democrat nominee has changed from the incumbent United States president to the current vice president, which is Kamala Harris. Obviously, both candidates now have their vice presidential nominees. For Donald Trump, that's J.D. Vance, and for Kamala Harris, that is the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz. So, without further delay, I'll get to categorizing some of these states. I'll start with the safe Democrat states. These are states that I think Kamala Harris is going to win by 15% or upwards. So that's Oregon, Washington, California, Illinois, Colorado, Illinois. Where else we got? We got Maryland here, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, Hawaii, and I think Maine's 1st district as well. I don't think there's very many strong cases to argue against any of those, so yeah, but Donald Trump's got a few safe states of his own, so he's going to probably win Utah safe, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, both the Dakotas. He's probably going to win Nebraska at large and the 1st and 3rd districts safe as well. Actually, 1st district he's probably going to win by a likely margin, so that's between under 15% but over 5%. Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. Pretty much all of these 3 deep southern states, Louisiana, Mississippi and Alabama, and probably Missouri and Indiana as well. I don't think there's much argument against any of them as such. So now onto the likely states. These are states that I think are going to be below 15% in their margins, but above 5% obviously. So Kamala Harris has a few of these. She's got New Mexico, probably New Hampshire and Maine, Virginia and Minnesota as well. Right, what's to say about some of these? In the case of New Mexico, look, I don't think Trump is going to do particularly well. I think he'll probably do a little better than he did in 2020 in New Mexico. The reason for that is, he's got the right demographic trends on his side with the Hispanic shift to the right, but I don't think it's going to make a massive difference in my opinion, because Harris I think will win about 7%. There was talk of possibly it being him narrowing it up significantly if Joe Biden was still the nominee, but that's not the case, so he's going to do a little better than in 2020, but not by much. Virginia, again, there was talk that Trump might narrow it up a little bit in this state, but I don't think that's going to be happening. Trump, he might be a good candidate for rural Virginia, but he's pretty much repellent in the DC suburbs, and that's where most of the electorate is here. And I just forgot to categorise DC, but it's categorised as safe D now. And, that's the northern area of the state. And, yeah, it was good for Republicans in the past. George Bush was able to win this area in the early 2000s. Mitt Romney did okay in this area in 2012, but he still lost it to Barack Obama by about 4%. And Harris, she's one good thing to say about her is she's quite strong as a candidate in the DC suburbs, so I think she wins the state by about 10 or so. Minnesota, obviously this is the home state of Tim Walz. He's the governor there, and he's Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick. And look, contrary to how he's been portrayed by some Republicans, I don't think I think he's actually popular in his home state, so I think Harris is winning Minnesota by about 8% or so. Trump is quite good in the rural areas of the state, but it's more suburban in terms of its electorate than rural, and Kamala Harris again is also quite good for suburban areas in this state as well. But Donald Trump has some likely states of his own. I think I'll start with Florida. I think the Democrats are pretty much Yeah, it's a nightmare for Democrats in this state. Even the Republicans, and they've been estimated to do quite well. I think they've even been underestimated, judging by early voting. You know, some polls had Trump, Trump up by about 6, but early voting suggests that Republicans are actually up above Democrats by 11. Republicans are on 45%, Democrats are on 34%. So, so I think Florida's pretty bleak as far as the Democrats are concerned. So, yeah, I think Florida's going to be better for the GOP in terms of a presidential result than it's been for years, really. So definitely safe, likely Republican in this case. I think South Carolina, Texas, Ohio, and Iowa, and the 2nd District and Maine are also going to go to the likely Republican column, and Alaska as well will also be in the likely column. In the case of Alaska, this is surprisingly one of the better likely Republican states for Democrats, and obviously it's left trending due to native voters being a demographic that's growing faster than the white working class voters, which creates a situation in which you have, which is almost more or less unique to Alaska, that is, where you have the urban areas being, the few urban areas where much of the population is being more Republican than the rural areas, which are more Democratic, because that's where the natives are more likely to live. And yeah, so I think Trump wins this, or Kamala loses this by about 8% or so. Yeah. And Texas, this is a likely bordering on lean state in my opinion. At the moment, I think the slight pro-Republican Hispanic swing will offset the suburban swing towards the Democrats and keep this within similar margins to 2020. So I think you've got Trump winning this by about 5% here, in my opinion. Where else we got? Iowa and Ohio. In the case of Ohio, look, it's decidedly the best Rust Belt state for Trump, hands down. People thought it would be close in 2020, with some thinking Biden was in with a shot, but Trump won it pretty cleanly by about 8% of the vote. I think he'll get something similar this time. And Iowa, it's a bit like Ohio, but it's even more rural than that. And so I think that is what favours Trump as well. I'll just put this in the likely Democrat column as well. Nebraska's 2nd congressional district for that. So yeah, I think that's about it for the likely states. And so these, what we're left with now is Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. So these are states that I think could go either way and will ultimately decide the results of the election. So I think either candidate could win these realistically at this point, but I think some candidates, Donald Trump is more favoured than others, Kamala Harris is more favoured than others. I'll start with by far the most confident one I have, which is Michigan, going to Kamala Harris by a lean margin. Look, there seems to be a misapprehension that because Michigan has a larger Arab population than most other states, not all other states, actually Illinois, which is next door across Lake Michigan, is actually better for it actually has a larger Arab population. That's got about an Arab population of about 4%. Yes, there's this narrative that it's going to swing towards the Republicans due to the current Democrat administration's handling of the Gaza conflict since 2023. I see no evidence for that personally. I don't buy that narrative. I don't know. Because, look, the percentage of self-described Muslims in Michigan is actually very small. It's only about 2.4%, which isn't actually that much. Far larger in Michigan is suburban voters, in places like Grand Rapids, which generally far prefer Harris at this time. So I think she's going to win it by about 1.5%. I mean, Trump could realistically win it, but I think Harris is a very strong favourite, although a marginal one here. So Trump's got at least one lean state of his own, and that's North Carolina. Look, North Carolina is trending slightly left at the moment. The state is going to be competitive for a long time. though I think the Democrats probably have a much brighter long-term future here. I think Trump's going to have a little Indian summer in North Carolina, and I think he's going to pull out a similar margin to what Kamala Harris is going to win by in Michigan, by so about 1.5%. So there's evidence from early voting with him doing slightly better with African American voters in the urban areas of the state. So that's cities like Fayetteville and Greensboro and the Raleigh-Durham area. So yeah, I think a marginal Trump win here, keeping it in Republican hands, as it's been since Obama won it in 2008. So, and it's just been it's felt pretty bleak for Democrats, so I think it will stay that way this time around. But yeah, I think there is a future for the Democrats here. So now I think we're on to the tilt states now, and so this is states that I think either candidate could realistically win these. And you know what, we'll start with Arizona, which I think is going to be tilt D this time around. Look, polls, especially last time around in 2022 during the gubernatorial races, they're over optimistic about Republican chances in Arizona. Like in the 2022 gubernatorial race, Kari Lake was consistently up by sometimes 5% or so, but in reality, Katie Hobbs, the Democrat, came, and albeit marginally, she came and won it in the end. And there's a lot of party crossover here, which has been a thing since at least, well, it's been a thing for years, but especially since Donald Trump made the John McCain comments. Obviously, John McCain was a senator from Arizona, and since Donald Trump made those comments, there's been a bit of a backlash towards him, and obviously, so some moderate and liberal Republicans ended up backing President Biden in 2020, and I think many are going to be doing the same for Harris in 2024. And plus, you've got this state obviously has the Maricopa suburbs in the sort of south centre of the state, and that's trending away from the Republicans substantially. That's where a great deal of the state's electorate live, and that tends to decide the election in the state and has a good track record of doing so. And so it's getting more suburban, and Trump's fairly toxic to suburban voters, if I'm being brutally honest. And yeah, so, and it also has an increasing percentage of native voters who I think, and obviously Trump's not strong with the natives at all, and so yeah, I think they're going to keep this by about 1% to the Democrats. Next door is Nevada. I think I'm comfortable giving this to Trump by a very narrow margin. I think the Democrats got overconfident in Nevada. They pulled funds from the state, which I think is going to hurt them. It's going to cost them dearly, as early voting suggests. I think Trump is up by 5% with early voting here, and although most of the remaining votes are from Democrat-leaning areas, I think the moderate damage is already done here. Trump wins this by about 1% or so. Probably the most talked about competitive state in this election is Georgia, and I think Trump's also going to marginally win this. I think Trump has been narrowly favoured in Georgia for a while, since at least last summer. I think you've got record early voting turnout in Georgia, both in the urban areas like Atlanta, Savannah, etc., and in the more rural ones too. And you might think this favours the Democrats, but I mean, it somewhat does, but the increase is partly among the Republicans as well, because the Republicans, at the end of the day, they know that early voting cost them the last election, and they're turning out more than ever to keep the state within, or to bring it back into Republican hands for at least one electoral cycle. And it's proven that the Republicans can still win statewide races in the state, as proven by Brian Kemp winning this by upwards of 6% in the last gubernatorial elections, which is an improvement on his 2018 performance against Stacey Abrams. And so I'm comfortable giving this to Trump by about just under 1%. So yeah, I think these things narrowly solidify a marginal Trump victory here. And got two states left to categorise, so these are going to decide the election, I think, here. And we'll start with Wisconsin, which is going to be tilt Democratic. I think this time around it's very marginal, but I think Kamala Harris is just slightly favoured here. Look, poll results are about 50-50 for who they show as actually winning the state here, but even though by rights I feel Trump should almost win this, because so much of the population in this state is white working class, but the polls show that Harris is generally up here by more than when they show Trump as being up. Like, you'll see polls like that are about Trump +1, but for every one of those you've got Harris up by 2, for example. So I think, you've got maybe a 0.5% Harris victory in this state. I think this will probably be the closest state in this election. And now it looks like Pennsylvania is going to decide the election. And although I'm not fully confident giving it to anybody yet, I think it's going to go marginally to Kamala Harris. The reason for that is the polls are generally very accurate here. Harris has had a stable lead of about 1% since entering the race in August. The Democrats favour her slightly here. And the suburban population, which largely favours Democrats, is actually growing in Pennsylvania. So I'm comfortable giving this to her by about 0.7%, I would say. So yeah, that's my result. Kamala Harris wins narrowly by 281 electoral votes, with Trump on 257. So yeah, that's Kamala Harris serving at least 4 years in the White House. And yeah, so that's my prediction. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know about it in the comments. This will be the final prediction. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.